Early in my career, I had the opportunity to work for two different organizations. Now, both of these organizations were in the travel industry. One organization was thriving and doing phenomenally successful. The other organization, on the other hand, was not doing so good. As a matter of fact, it was losing profits every quarter. Now, I took notice that there was a distinct difference in both of the organizations. As a matter of fact, there was a critical success factor that one of the organizations had that the other one did not have. This critical success factor was the fact that there was one organization, the one that was really successful. This one was the organization that invested heavily in developing its leaders. As a matter of fact, it had a philosophy that you did not have to have a title to lead, that everyone is a leader within their own sphere of influence. Now, the other organization, the one that performed poorly, their philosophy was that if you don't have a title, then you better not lead. So therefore, don't even try to become a leader because you don't have a title. Now, I noticed something during that time. I noticed that the culture of the organization that invested in their leaders was much greater. I recognized that people were happier. I recognized that the tone that was set from the leadership, from the CEO on down, trickled down to the employees. And the employees then trickled that to the customers by giving the customers better service. The reality of the fact is that I could really say the same thing for the other organization. The culture that the top leader set was, we want money, we want results. And it created an environment where people were scared to speak up. They were scared to make contributions. And that ended up trickling down to the customers. So what I'd like you to do is think about this question. Why is it that companies that invest in developing their leaders outperform those that don't? Well, that is what we're exploring. Now, the first thing, as I have been in the leadership development field for quite a while, is that organizations that develop their leaders are becoming increasingly important. There's becoming a demand not only from team members, but there's becoming a demand from customers for better leadership. And a phenomenal thought is that stakeholders, investors, are now starting to put pressure on companies to invest in their leaders, because they realize that if you invest in leaders and develop the leaders to be great leaders, then that is how you develop a great organization. Carter, Ulrich, and Goldsmith, they said that leaders are not just looking for great service. They're not just looking for a great product. I mean, every leader wants that. Every CEO wants that. Every vice president wants that. But what they are looking for, in addition to great service, in addition to a great product, they want their leaders to be developed, because they understand, how do we get to great leadership? How do we get to a great service? How do we get to great products? How do we get to great customer service? It is through the avenue of leadership development. So I'm going to talk about 4 key anchors that an organization must have in order to get to that better performance, to outperform organizations that don't invest in their leaders. As a matter of fact, studies show that when organizations focus on these 4 pillars or tenets, then they will phenomenally surpass their competition. And here's why. So the first thing that an organization must have is a leadership strategy. Now, surprisingly, when you talk to organizations and you go to conferences, you will find out that they have a strategy to sell product. They have a strategy to serve customers. They have a strategy for marketing. But surprisingly, many organizations fail to have a strategy around leadership. Now, why is this important? It is important because organizations that have a strategy around leadership are very strategic in how they build their leaders. So they put forth the work in really thinking about it, asking themselves the tough questions. How do we build better leaders? Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why. The great organizations start with the why. They ask the questions, why aren't our leaders developing? Or even more importantly, why is it important that we develop our leaders? Leadership strategy should include a strategy around your people, the people that you serve. A leadership strategy should include how are we going to not only serve these people and develop these people, but how are we going to grow them? Great organizations realize that I just don't want to pay my people to do a job. I want them to grow. So they are not in the same position year after year. I want them to grow. Also, organizations invest heavily into what we call formal learning. This is a part of their leadership strategy. Now, formal learning would be considered as classes. This would be considered instructor-led training. This would be considered going to a conference. But organizations realize that, you know what? If we're going to have a strategy, we need to strategize on how do we grow our people. And a way that we do that is through formal learning. The next one is that they have to have training programs. There's been many studies that show that organizations that invest in the right training and the right development can trace that training, the impact of the training, back to the bottom line. So there's a return on investment. Years ago, I worked for a organization which was a Fortune 100 company, and we were tasked with developing a program that we could track and see that the effectiveness of the program increased the bottom line. And without fail, after 1 year of implementation, we were able to see that the skills that the leaders had in class, they were able to implement it back at work, and immediately the organization became more profitable. So organizations understand that they have a learning strategy, number one. They implement training programs that increase the bottom line. And next, they have what we call development plans. Now, this is very critical because organizations realize that after you have our strategy, you have your training, now there needs to be development plans, which is not so much high level, but more drilled down on how do we develop each individual contributor in this organization. Organizations that are successful at this realize that everybody in the organization, whether you're CEO or whether you're janitor, can develop. As a matter of fact, it is a scientific fact that humans are the only living species that can intentionally develop themselves. And so companies who are effective at this understand and take advantage of having a development plan for all of their team members. Lastly, so what are the benefits of development? Well, there is a benefit to employees. The team member automatically wins when there is a company that's developed. Employee satisfaction goes up. Morale goes up. Studies also show that performance goes up. Studies show that conflict goes down when there's development. Because think about this. Team members at large organizations or any company, they come to work every single day. They work hard. They put it all on the line every day. And they're asking the question, well, now that I work so hard, what is the company going to do for me? There are many companies out there that never respond, that say, we just want you to work hard. And those are the companies that have high turnover. As a matter of fact, I work for a cruise company doing training and development. One of the saddest stories that I've ever heard, someone came into my office. He had worked in the galley as a dishwasher for 14 years on this cruise ship. He came in my office, he sat down, and he began to cry. He said, I've worked on this cruise ship for 14 years. People come in for 14 years. They throw their dishes at me. This is the nastiest job on the ship. I work 7 months straight with no days off. And the saddest part about this is that I'm faithful to this company. And what are they going to do for me? Every time I try to apply for another position, they say I don't have the skills. Every time I try to get the skills, they say, well, no one wants to work in your position as the dishwasher, so we need you to stay there. Don't worry about moving on to the next level. Now, this happens all the time in all different organizations, where organizations don't value those that make valuable contributions to the organization. And they get lost. And then they feel like they're not valued. So organizations that focus on these things, focus on development, right? There's a case to be made. And studies show that they outperform organizations who don't. As a matter of fact, case in point, I know organizations, or I know people personally, that make over six-figure salaries that are absolutely miserable. They're miserable because the culture is toxic. The organization doesn't care. I also know people who work for maybe less than half of that are absolutely happy because the organization is developing them. We can look at General Motors, for example. General Motors is an organization that has thrived during the automotive renaissance, but it took a deep dive. And it also has picked back up because they chose to focus on the people and focus on development. My name is Christopher Appleton. Thank you.